And I'm going to start by having our panelists that have lots of experience sharing who they are, where they're at, and how long they've owned their forest land, or how many generations they've had the land in their family. And then from there, we'll move on to our first speaker, Tracy, who will introduce herself. So, Fred, do you want to give people an idea of who you are and where you're coming from first?
Sure. Fred Seavey, Eastern Napa County, and I live on a 200-acre ranch that's been part of our family for about nearly 50 years. And about 120 acres is forested. We also have fruit orchard, olive trees, vegetable garden. We farm 35 acres of grapes, have cattle, sheep, goats, chickens. That's us.
Great, thank you. Jane and Dennis, do you want to introduce yourselves really quick?
Hi. We live on 68 acres in the Santa Cruz Mountains at just under 3,000 feet. It's very sloped, forested, heavily forested land. We have about 10 acres that we're managing pretty carefully, a couple of which are orchard and Christmas tree farm. And then we're trying to kind of maintain meadows and open up and restore some of the habitat for the black oak that was here before settlers came. Yeah.
And how long have you owned your
Dennis. Mhm.
Yeah. She asked how long I think we're living here.
Oh, we've been living here since 2012.
All right. Christy, will you introduce yourself?
Hi, Judd and I live right along the Highway 49. We've been here for just over a year, so we've been here for two fire seasons. This is our second burn season, and we've got about 30 acres of forest that we are reforesting. We've tried. We have pigs and we have guinea fowl, and then dogs, and.
Awesome. Thank you for being here, Christy.
Sure.
And then last but not least, Matthew, can you introduce yourself really quick, please?
Sure. My name is Matthew Todd. My wife and I own a little over 22 acres in Soquel, which is in the Santa Cruz Mountains right near Capitola. It's coast live oak and redwood forest, lots of madrone, some bay. We have some meadow that we're trying to make sure it doesn't type convert to brushland. So we're doing what we can to reestablish a healthy forest ecosystem and to maintain and establish the meadows as we imagine and as we hope we learn are the way that they were hundreds of years ago before people who look like me did bad things to them. But we've only been there for not quite 2 years. We have chickens and we have veggie garden and things like that, but otherwise it's mostly wild.
All right, we're gonna roll right into our panel discussion now. We'll start with our first question. We'll give everybody about 3 minutes to answer these questions if they feel like they're prepared to. So our first question about evacuation is, can you please share one thing that you would recommend that all forest landowners have in place in preparation for evacuation? And what were your biggest lessons that you learned when you were evacuated? So for those of our panelists that have had the unfortunate experience of being evacuated or being asked to evacuate, we'd love to hear about how that went for you.
Guess I could start. Fred Seavey, Eastern Napa County. So the glass fire and the LNU complex fire came very close in 2020. The sheriff asked us to evacuate. We'd done a bunch of work on our land in terms of preparing defensible space, structure hardening, and also, reducing fuel loads in the areas surrounding, all of the structures, et cetera, pretty broadly. And we brought over CAL FIRE crew to inspect our area before, and also chief of a volunteer fire department. They all suggested, because we're fairly remote, that it would take a long time for firefighters to get to our place, and that we needed to be prepared, to defend our place, and that also we developed a place with gravel that's quite broad that we could use as a fire refuge if fire were to kind of overtake us. So we didn't evacuate, and one of my brothers and I, we stayed back for 5 days without power, and lots of smoke, and just preparing. So that was I'm not suggesting that this is the appropriate, response for others, because firefighters typically, they always, request that people evacuate so that we don't tie down firefighters in terms of emergency response. But this was the approach that we took. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Fred. That's certainly a unique experience, but if you do the work that, that may or may not be an option for you, depending on what fire professionals say about it. Jane, did you want to share your evacuation experience?
Hi, yeah, we, so the CZU August Lightning Complex fire occurred here in 2020, and we were in the mandatory evacuation area. However, the sheriff gave us permission to stay because we could see the fire, essentially, because we're at a higher elevation. So our preparation had involved making sure that our exit route, which is kind of a long road, it's a quarter of a mile, was limbed up and cleared. And so there wasn't, we were actually kind of okay. We just worked on monitoring whether firebrands came across to our ridge and that kind of thing, staying awake all night long, having supplies on hand to be able to be without power. And I think what we have done since that experience is increase our water storage capacity, and acquired a number of fire fittings and fire hoses to have on hand, and stage those as we can, kind of near and around the house and along the escape route. So I think that's most of what our learning was, and the changes that we made after 2020. Big projects, digging trenches and adding water tanks and stuff like that. But we feel a lot better now because of having a lot more water on hand now. That's about it.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. Matthew, you have a unique perspective as a wildland firefighter as well as a landowner. Do you have an experience that you'd be willing to share with us?
Sure. So thankfully for us thus far, we haven't had to evacuate. I will say, just locally, not as a wildland firefighter, but as somebody who's part of a Firewise community in a region that has very narrow roads, many one-way roads, things like that. We're part of a Firewise community, and part of the Firewise community projects is ensuring that egress routes are effective and tested. And one of the things that we realized very quickly is that egress routes are they must be one way. So we have to be able to coordinate with the sheriff that what direction of the fire is the fire or the firefighter is coming from, and where all the neighbors need to go. So coordinating the egress on narrow roads where often they have to be one way is a priority. The only thing I can say as a wildland firefighter is recognizing that when a wildfire hits, you're going to get resources in the area fighting the fire that are not familiar with the area. They're going to be relying on maps, information that they can get electronically, things like that. So working with your local fire department to be sure that sources of water, turnaround points, access points, all those things are well documented and can be communicated to folks that are coming in who aren't familiar with the area is critical. So if you can have available water, like Jane and Dennis are talking about, have the fittings ready to go for an engine to fill up, for example, that's a huge thing. If you put up signage that says that you've got water available, and also working with your local fire department to be sure they have that information.
That's great information. Thank you. And then Christy and Judd, I know you have a unique evacuation story as well. Do you want to share yours?
Judd, do you want to talk about we were stuck. Actually, there was a mudslide issue in Santa Barbara, and so we got stuck. And Judd had to take a boat to work. But in terms of evacuating, we've only been evacuated once, and it just what I learned and my experience was that I didn't need to take all the personal items. Like there would be at the evacuation center, there was clothes, there was food, there were toothbrushes and toothpaste. But there wasn't a comfortable sleeping situation and there wasn't a great situation for my animals. So that was really the most important thing, was that I had a comfortable situation for my domestic animals. I don't have a whole lot of experience otherwise. I don't know, Judd?
Yeah, not a lot of experience. So mostly, all of it's around planning, and I like what we've picked up today, the staging of the equipment and the water hoses. We have those scattered around our property already, so we have some start to it, but they're not, we don't have a large enough storage yet. So looking forward to sorting that one out in the future, for sure.
Great, thanks. And then we still have a couple more minutes. Susie, did you I asked you to also talk a little bit about your evacuation experience. All right, we're gonna move back to our panel and talk a little bit about defensible space, which I know all of our panelists have experience with implementing, whether if they've owned the home for a long time or if they're new to their home. So yeah, so our question for our panelists are, did your home have defensible space when you purchased your property or when you took over the responsibility of your property? And what work has been needed on your property to help you feel safe in the event of a fire? So was that just doing your defensible space, or did you need to go beyond your defensible space to feel like you could be comfortable leaving your house during an evacuation or if there was fire nearby?
Maybe I could start again. Fred Seavey, Napa County. And so our family has been here almost 50 years. But since especially the catastrophic fires that we've experienced, since 2017 in this region, but we've upped our game in terms of defensible space. So yes, we've invested a lot of time and energy in terms of structure hardening, also defensible space. And then the other thing we think a lot about is also systems hardening. And when I say systems, I think there's a bridge that goes across the creek. How safe is that bridge? Will it burn? We rely on gravity-fed, water from a 10,000 gallon tank up high. How safe is our PVC? Does the PVC line emerge from the soil? It'll melt with radiant heat. What kind of fuels are nearby the PVC line? So those kinds of things. Also, the telephone poles and energy, lines, etc. All of those systems as well. And then beyond the defensible space, we've done a lot of work. We're in something called the Conn Valley, CONN, but this area has not burned in at least 110 years. A lot of built-up fuels on the forest floor. So, like I said, we got about 120 acres of oak woodlands. So I spent a lot of time going up, and we bought a used chipper from a PG&E contractor. We chipped as much as we could, and then when we get into steeper areas, we build. And I spend a lot of time. I work a day job, but after that, I go out and build burn piles. And so one winter, for example, built and burned 250 piles. But it requires that level of work in order to feel safe. And for my goal is not only to protect our structures here, but we really love the oak woodlands, all the creatures that inhabit it. So we want those woodlands to survive. And we know if we do the work right, reduce the fuel loads, that they can survive, or we hope they can. But that's us.
Thanks so much, Fred. Yeah, I think that's a great point about not just thinking about your defensible space, but your evacuation route, your ingress, egress as well. Thank you for sharing. Who wants to go next?
No, I'd be happy to do it for us.
Thanks, Jen.
In our case right now, we're pretty well focused on actually doing zone 0 for our house and around the house. But when we got here, the defensible space wasn't really ironed out. There was a lot of debris and things on the hillsides that kind of led straight up to the house. And so we had to get prioritized. And I wasn't, when we first bought the place, I wasn't aware of, well, I guess I was just kind of new to the whole idea, but you know, we had to start with prioritizing down by our neighbors because of the slope coming up towards our property. And the amount of fuel that our neighbors have on their property is pretty enormous. So we kind of started with creating what we call a park where we pretty well cleared everything that's along where our structures are around our property, facing that particular neighbor, so that we could be focused and prevent the spread up towards the you know, our egress roads. We even give egress for our neighbors too. So all that stuff had to be protected. Still working on a couple of the big piles that we have back there, but by and large, we've got most of it, so they should be able to drive out of our property and CAL FIRE can get in. So that's been our current focus.
That's great. Thanks, Judd. Christy, do you have anything you want to add to what Judd shared?
I would add that a couple of surprises about a month about a month after we bought the property, we received a notice that our insurance was canceled. And unless we removed a tree or trimmed a tree or some such, but they didn't give us that specific. They just said your insurance is canceled. And so I tracked down our insurance agent and discovered that we needed to have a tree trimmed. And then once the tree was trimmed, I could send a photo to the insurance agent and they would go ahead and then reinstate the insurance. And we'd of course prepaid for the insurance for the year, the fire insurance. So that was a little unsettling. It was an easy fix, but it was shocking. For sure. For sure. And the other thing that I had noted was yeah, I think Judd covered it because making the plan for fuel reduction was the biggest, you know, we really thought we would come in and just make the 100 feet of defensible space and it would be no big deal. But then we realized that the area that we purchased there hasn't burned in 30 years. And our neighbors aren't really, there's only one set of neighbors that has people that live there. They actually have a single cowboy and some livestock. So we don't really have neighbors and we don't really have other people participating in fuel reduction. And so it really did fall on us to create a comfortable zone around the house and an evacuation zone for both our tenants, because we have tenants that live up our private driveway. And that's been a great focus for us.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Dennis and Jane, do you want to share about your defensible space? You've put a ton of work into your property.
Yes, we did. When we came, it was a mess, and we had a lot of work to do. I think you should realize that it's never done. It's a lot of work, of course, and it's brutal work sometimes. And you never finish with it. It's actually, I think the most striking thing that I think we notice is how productive the ecosystem is here. How much growth you have every year. It's incredible. And you get to remove all of that, disposal of that. We do lots of pipe burning. So you prepare to do a lot of work, and also it's not cheap. You know, I don't think you can really do it on the cheap because it's too much work. Sometimes you need help. And I think that's about it. Maybe adding also that we try to do this without, you know, maintaining the ecosystem as well. And one of, I think the trick is to figure out, for instance, when to mow. If you mow too often, too early, you get no flowers and nothing, you're only left with weeds. And so you don't want also to mow too late because you don't want to mow when the fire season has started. So there's a few choices like that that you need to think about if you don't want to destroy that nice place that we like by just cutting everything down. And I think it's about it. Maybe lastly, you can do everything at once. And you need to think about probability, and you use your judgment to figure out what's urgent when you need to start. Otherwise, it's really overwhelming.
Those are some great words of wisdom. Thank you for sharing those. And then Matthew, last but not least, what is your experience with defensible space?
Well, I think other people have actually said it remarkably well. Dennis touched on the overwhelming aspect, which was something for us being new to living in the woods, the WUI. It really has been a matter of prioritization and really thinking about sort of expanding rings going out from the home, essential things around egress routes, for example, and things that we know are going to kill us, like that massive oak tree that is on the process of dying that happens to be over the house. We had that removed within the first couple of months that we were there at great expense. But yeah, it was thankfully the previous owners who actually built the home itself as something that was very sound, very well built for fire, but then they put all kinds of beautiful plants right up next to the house. So things that we loved about it when we bought it had to be removed later when we realized this is not going to make for a defensible space. So that was really kind of tragic. But another thing that we're doing is actually working with a forester. So as Dennis pointed out, reach out for help. There are ways to help you to prioritize, and you can bring in experts who can help you figure out what's going to give you the biggest bang for the buck, realizing that you have multiple priorities. There's the priority to have a defensible space and to protect your home and your family and your possessions, but also if you have a priority around restoring or maintaining the land or things like that. We'll talk about fuel management in the next section. I definitely have some thoughts there, but the forester actually has been a great source of information and guidance and perspective, right, that we didn't have, and he helped us to identify, for example, unhealthy trees that we're trying to take care of, things like that. So, yeah.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing that. So we'll move on to our last panel. I think all of our panelists here have some experience, if not a lot of experience, with their local prescribed burn association. Our question for our panelists is, well, we have two questions. The first is, why did you want to use fire on your property? What spurred you to use fire on your property? And then what was required to get your property in a state to use fire effectively? I know some of you are still in the process of getting your property to the state that you want it to be to use fire, and some of you have already used fire. So we would love to hear about all of your experiences. All right, so who would like to start? Matthew, I see your microphone is off or on.
Oh, I'm just ready whenever you are, but sure, I'll jump in.
All right.
I will add to the previous presentation what Susie was talking about. Another great resource that we have had, that my wife and I have used, is our local RCD. And they'll come out for free and talk to you about things like invasive species management and water management and all kinds of great things. So I highly recommend you reach out to your local resource conservation district. In Santa Cruz County, we've got a great one. Why do we want to use fire on our property? Well, we want to reestablish and maintain a healthy forest ecosystem, which I've already mentioned. And that's going to naturally include things that end up reducing wildfire risk as well. So things like reducing tree density, removing unhealthy trees, removing invasive species, maintaining low understory brush loads, and returning nutrients to the soil. That's what we would be doing when we use fire. Broadcast burning will help with a lot of that, and as was pointed out, it's a natural part of the ecosystem in our area. in California as a whole. Um, to get to a point where we will be able to use fire effectively, and we have plans to definitely do more than just the pile burning that we've been doing, which is part of the prep. So we do plan to do broadcast burns. But we've been manually removing diseased trees and creating piles. And then I've also been doing a lot of thinning of understory brush, sort of almost imagining what fire returning on a regular interval would do with the understory brush, and then mechanically using brush cutters or other tools, reducing the height and the scope of brush, imagining a mosaic, and then trying to create mosaics within the understory. So that if we do have a prescribed fire, it's going to be of a reasonable intensity. And if we had a wildfire, it's also going to be reducing the intensity. And then we're also thinking about, okay, if we're going to be doing prescribed fire, where is it going to be, and what kinds of borders can we create around it? And we naturally have some trails on our property that we love, and they naturally make great control points for what prescribed fires will do. So it's further incentive for me to go and maintain those trails with an eye towards them being control points for prescribed fire in the future. So a couple of thoughts. I don't want to steal everybody's thunder here. Can I point out that two of us on the panel are actual members of the board of directors of the Central Coast PBA. Jane and I are both here as homeowners, but also we are with the Central Coast PBA, also available from that Cal BBA website. So worth checking out. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that, Matthew. And I think it's a great point about, thinking about when you're managing your property, also thinking about how you're going to maintain it going forward and putting in that infrastructure in advance to be able to do so. It's a really great tool and thought process. All right. I know the rest of our panelists also have thoughts. Can I call on Christy and Judd to share their experiences next?
Sure. I wanted to note, I forgot to mention, one of the things that I've learned since I've moved out into the forest is to park the vehicles towards the exit. So whenever I'm parking vehicles, it's always towards the exit, even when people come to stay. I just am making a habit of it, and I think it's a good thing. We want to use fire and are using fire for fuel reduction, like fast fuel reduction, because we have so many hand piles and so many machine piles and so many piles and so much debris and a lot of downed wood. And so it's just the fastest way to get rid of it. Anything that isn't treated gets burned. So any treated woods have to go to the dump. The dump is so inexpensive here, and there's never a line. It is just the easiest thing in the world to do. So I take everything that we're not supposed to burn to the dump, and that just leaves an immeasurable amount of stuff for us to burn. So what I did is I wrote down my thing. So we signed up for a pile burning course, and we showed up for burns with the Yosemite Gateway Prescribed Burn Coalition. That was the first thing we did coming from the beach. So we needed to learn how to have a manageable fire. And the next thing is that we had a representative from that coalition come to our home, and she hiked the 30-acre property with us through the poison oak, through the bramble, and helped us make a fire plan. We talked about our goals, how we could achieve them, and we have this plan. And we would not be anywhere near as successful if we hadn't reached out to this group. I'll just put that right out there. Their knowledge sharing is really, really, really nice. So we also had support from AmeriCorps through this group come out for an entire day and help remove the hand piles that were made by PG&E employees directly under our power lines. So there's little things like that to notice. You might think, oh, look, we've got all these great piles ready to go burn. And then you look up in the air and you go, oh, power lines. Maybe we don't want to burn directly under the power lines. So things like that to consider. Judd, what do you have to add?
Oh, I'm still learning about it, so I'm always fascinated. I started with a question: how frequently would you broadcast burn a particular area or section? Um, just one of my questions. I'm not sure how frequently we should look forward to doing this. That said, really need help. You know, it seems to be the best, most efficient way that I can imagine to clean up the fine fuels that we have. We have lots of fine fuel sitting around, and it's just hard to manage. And we also have a lot of stuff that looks like it's leaning up into the trees, and it's going to, you know, lead the fire up into the canopy. So on our steep enough slope with the canyon winds and all that, we already have, you know, pretty objective hazards there or risk. So it'll be nice to see a broadcast burn, hopefully go across our lower 3 acres. That would clear up a lot of that underbrush and just take care of a lot of, you know, hopefully, as they say, break the ladder a little bit so that we have, you know, more room. And then even after we burn, we have this burn this year, we're expecting to have to do, I have 25–30% of the trees need to be thinned out because we're just overgrown everywhere. And so it's really quite a bit of work. But yeah, I guess that's my 2 cents on the.
Thanks, Judd. I'm looking forward to burning your guys' property.
Yeah, it's gonna be fun.
Hopefully in the next year or two. Jane and Dennis, do you want to add anything? I guess just a really quick, Judd, I think that's a great question. If we have time at the end, we'll give some time to discuss that.
Wonderful.
Yeah, that is a good question. Uh, Gosh, everybody's covered a lot of the things that we think about a lot. But one of the major things about the Santa Cruz Mountains is that it's ground zero for sudden oak death. And so this goes along with sort of hoping that, you know, with all of our work over time, we start to move the forest structure towards what was more the case before the indigenous people that tended the land here were removed. And so we think about it in terms of hoping to restore a forest structure that's more open and allows more aeration and a lower humidity in the understory, which is going to be a forest structure that doesn't promote sudden oak death as readily. And also the species composition back more towards what it was prior to European settlement, meaning a forest structure that had more larger trees and fewer bay laurels interspersed. That's one of the species we struggle with, and we remove pretty aggressively, as well as such a proliferation of young Doug firs. And we have a number of small meadows also, so it's a super huge focus for us to try to lower vegetation around the edges of the meadows and keep it from encroaching. And also the black oak stands, trying to kind of maintain their health as well. So what we're doing is a huge amount of pile burning, just enormous amounts of power burning, and working on a burn plan. So I guess it's looking at what do you have, what are you trying to do, focusing on how you can use fire in different areas. So around small meadows, you know, we're planning to try to burn those as frequently as we can to keep them open, and then continue to pile burn and create some control lines along the steep slopes around where we are, so that we have that open forest structure that's going to be more resistant to sudden oak death over time. Yeah, so steep terrain, control lines, it's all very difficult, but you just take it one small unit at a time, like an acre or a half acre, and just look at it and try to figure out what the best thing is that you can do. And we hope to burn broadcast in the next year or so. We'll see.
That's awesome. That's so many, you have so many good points there, so many good nuggets of wisdom, Jane. Thank you. Fred, I see that you're back. Did you want to add anything about your experience burning your property and why you wanted to use fire on your property?
Yeah, we had to use fire because of the steep slopes and we couldn't get a chipper in there. And we haven't attempted prescribed fire, but instead of use burn piles. And really also, I guess I would encourage people like the UC Extension, forest stewardship class is really wonderful. I took that and then it turned me on to a registered professional forester. We built a forest management plan and really helped me to learn and understand the ecosystem and create a longer term vision. But the other last thing I'll say is simply that we can't, right? I talk to my neighbors, like you can't think about the fuel reduction work as one and done. Stuff grows back. So you got to have a long-term plan. Okay, and how are you going to manage the fuels, whether it's with, a chainsaw and burn piles or, we use livestock a lot. So our cattle are really effective. We also have sheep and goats. But anyway, putting thought into that long-term management strategy for your forest is really important.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Fred. I know we talk a lot about fire and there's so many tools and that we can have in our toolboxes and knowing where and how and under what circumstances those are appropriate is it's really powerful for landowners to recognize.